when the king of late-night television took his final breath. There were no speeches, no cameras, no sea of limousines lining a church parking lot. There was no public farewell for the man who had lulled America to sleep for 3 decades. Johnny Carson died the way he had lived off stage. Quietly, guarded, and with great intention. On January 23, 2005, the iconic host of The Tonight Show passed away at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles from respiratory failure caused by the emphysema he had been battling for years. He was 79. His nephew, Jeff Sotz, delivered a short but heavy announcement. He was surrounded by his family, whose loss will be immeasurable. There will be no memorial service. For a man who spent half his life performing in front of millions, Carson had spent the other half fighting to protect his privacy. Dick Cavett once said Carson could charm an entire nation but struggled to hold a 10-minute conversation with a stranger in a hallway. Ed McMahon famously joked, "Johnny was relaxed in front of 20 million people, but uncomfortable in front of 20. And so, in death, Johnny got what he never found in life. Silence. His body was cremated, his ashes given only to his wife, Alexis Moss. No gathering, no tributes from the stage, no final curtain call. The world grieved from a distance. Flowers covered his Walk of Fame star. Fans left notes at Johnny Carson Park across from the NBC studios, where he had created magic for decades. Presidents, entertainers, and late-night hosts spoke his name with reverence. Jay Leno called him the standard everyone else tried to reach. David Letterman, the man Carson believed should have inherited The Tonight Show, said, "We are all pretending we will never see another like him." But while the world mourned, one name rose from the past, a name that carried both gratitude and heartbreak. Not someone who came to a funeral, but someone whose absence was louder than any presence. A name tied to the greatest professional betrayal Johnny Carson ever experienced. Before she was a legend, Joan Rivers was a nobody. Sleeping in her car, collecting coins in coffee cups at dingy clubs, and failing audition after audition. She tried 7 times to get onto Carson's show. 7 times she was rejected. By 1965, most people told her she would never make it. Then came February 17, 1965, a small mercy booking, a final chance. Rivers walked out believing it might be her last performance. But that night, something extraordinary happened. Her timing was razor sharp, her wit effortless, her presence magnetic. The room didn't just laugh, they lit up. And the one person who mattered saw it. When she finished and joined him at the desk, Johnny leaned toward her and said the sentence that changed her life, "You're going to be a star." When Johnny Carson looked across his desk on national television and said, "You're going to be a star," Joan Rivers almost turned around to see who else he could possibly be talking to. She later said that the chemistry they shared on that stage was like catching lightning in a bottle, unrehearsed, natural, and electric. In that moment, something irreversible happened. Carson didn't just give her approval, he gave her legitimacy. He became her guide, her gatekeeper, her kingmaker. For nearly 2 decades, she was a fixture of The Tonight Show, making close to 100 appearances. Their dynamic became iconic. Carson, the smooth and steady master of the room, and Rivers, the fearless firecracker who could make him genuinely lose control laughing. When Joan launched her first daytime talk show in 1968, Johnny didn't just support her, he came on as her first celebrity guest, a public seal of blessing few ever received. Over time, Joan became more than a recurring guest. She became the trusted substitute, the voice that filled the seat when the king himself left the throne. In 1983, she was officially named permanent guest host, a position reserved for only one person in the industry. The world saw her as his successor, the heir apparent. But here was the truth hidden beneath the applause. Their relationship lived almost entirely under the studio lights. When the camera stopped, the warmth disappeared. Joan once wrote, "Our friendship existed only on camera. Even during commercial breaks we barely spoke, not out of resentment, but because Carson famously kept a wall around his personal life. He was not a mentor who shared secrets, nor a friend who opened his heart. He was an institution. She was the talent he had lifted. That silent hierarchy was the foundation of everything that would later shatter." By the mid-1980s, Joan began to feel the ground shift underneath her. When NBC renewed Johnny's contract for 2 years, she was offered only one. It was a signal, one she could not ignore. Worse came when a confidential memo leaked listing potential successors for Carson. Joan searched the list, expecting her own name to lead it. It wasn't there, not anywhere. After years of service, loyalty, and earned audience trust, she realized the network never intended for the throne to be hers. She believed it was because she was a woman, visible enough to entertain, but never considered worthy to inherit. At the exact moment her confidence was shaken, a new force appeared. The newly formed Fox network, led by Barry Diller, wanted to launch with impact. They offered Joan her own late-night show, The Late Show starring Joan Rivers, scheduled directly opposite Carson's time slot. And the offer was enormous, $10 million, far beyond anything NBC had paid her. Rivers was caught between gratitude and survival. The man who made her career was on one side, the network that had quietly dismissed her future was on the other. And for the first time, Joan felt that choosing to stay loyal might mean choosing to disappear. Her husband and manager, Edgar Rosenberg, urged her to stay silent until every signature was on the Fox contract. His advice wasn't emotional, it was pure Hollywood survival. He reminded her that those who left The Tonight Show for rival programs were often immediately blacklisted, erased overnight from Carson's world. If she told Johnny too soon and the deal collapsed, she could lose everything. And if Carson objected, one quiet phone call could kill the deal before it was ever born. So Joan withheld the truth, a silence that would haunt her for the rest of her life. But the weekend before the official announcement, the news leaked. And what followed remains one of the most painful disputes in entertainment history. According to Joan, she panicked and called Johnny immediately, trying to explain. She said he answered, she spoke, and he simply hung up. She called again. He hung up once more. That was the last time they ever spoke. Carson, however, told a completely different story, that no such call ever happened, and that he found out about her show the same way the public did, through the press. To him, it was betrayal, not ambition, and while he had given male comedians his blessing to branch out, Rivers believed gender played a cruel role. She later said, I think he felt because I was a woman, I was his. I wasn't supposed to leave him. A man leaving was ambition. A woman leaving was betrayal. To Carson, she had not just left, she had challenged the king. And the king struck back. The ban was immediate and absolute. Joan Rivers was never again allowed on The Tonight Show, not during Johnny's era nor for years afterward. But the punishment went deeper. Carson quietly warned the industry, anyone who appeared on Joan's show would no longer be welcome on his. For actors, singers, comedians, for anyone climbing the ladder, the choice was obvious. Almost every major guest chose Carson. Joan's show, The Late Show, premiered in October 1986, but without star guests and facing The Tonight Show's massive power, it struggled. Behind the scenes, the pressure was even worse. Edgar clashed bitterly with Fox executives. Less than a year later, the network delivered an ultimatum: fire Edgar or lose the show. Joan refused. Fox fired them both, and the world watched Joan Rivers fall from the highest place she had ever been. But then came a tragedy deeper than humiliation. Crushed by professional defeat, overwhelmed by debt, and drowning in despair, Edgar took his own life. 3 months after they were fired, Joan Rivers stood alone, career shattered, reputation scorched, mourning the man she loved. The woman who once made America laugh every night now had no show, no husband, and no one to catch her when she fell. And yet through all of it, through the public humiliation, the career collapse, the suicide of the man she loved, Johnny Carson, the person who once lifted her to the top of the world, remained silent. He did not call, he did not write, he did not acknowledge her grief in any form. That silence became the sharpest wound of all. It revealed something far darker than a late-night feud. It revealed the terrifying depth of Carson's pride to a world that saw him as charming, warm, and effortlessly funny. There existed another Johnny, one who guarded grudges like sacred treasure and could cut someone out of his world with surgical coldness. Joan later said, it was like Stalin had sent me to Siberia. And she wasn't exaggerating. The king had spoken, and the sentence was exile. When Carson died quietly in January of 2005, the world mourned a legend. But behind the tributes and glowing headlines lurked the story of the woman he had never forgiven. Joan Rivers became the ghost that hovered over his legacy. She was not physically present at any funeral, because there was no funeral, but she was there in every headline, every remembrance, every whispered conversation about who Johnny Carson really was. Her public response to his death was heartbreaking in its bitterness and complicated love. In one interview, she called him a mean son of a, and in the next breath described him as the most brilliant straight man comedy had ever known. She did not regret leaving for Fox, but she mourned the ending that could have been. She once imagined a moment years later, on live television, where Johnny would look at her, crack that familiar crooked smile, and simply say, "Where you been?" The audience would have roared, the world would have sighed in relief, and two television giants would have closed the chapter with grace. But that moment never came. Instead, Joan carried the weight of that silence alone. In one of the most vulnerable scenes ever filmed, on her reality show Joan and Melissa, she visited the site where Carson's ashes rested and spoke aloud to the air, searching for forgiveness from a man who, even in death, refused to answer. And that is why Joan Rivers was the true unseen guest at Johnny Carson's funeral. not in person, but in legacy. While he slipped quietly out of the world, she was left holding the full story, her voice the only testimony to a friendship and betrayal that changed television forever. In the end, Johnny Carson got the quiet departure he always wanted, but his silence was not empty. It echoed with the memory of the one person he had made into a star, and the one person he could never bring himself to forgive. The final guest at the King's farewell was not a figure in black, but the ghost of a fractured bond, born from a single sentence that created a legacy and ended with the sound of a telephone being placed back into its cradle.